All right, I'm going to go live here in just a minute. I'm going to copy the link on Classroom to let all of your classmates know that I'm live streaming. Hmm. There we go. All right, I am going to wait just a few minutes before I actually start. Because I did say 10 a.m. for American government kiddos. And I'm very punctual, if you will. And I do live off of a pretty good schedule. I hope you guys are being safe. I hope that you're able to do some things. And of course, I cannot stress enough, guys, you need to be clean. You need to wash your hands, hand sanitizer, just be smart. And please try to abide by those groups of 10 or less. And just be smart. Okay, make sure you guys have a schedule at home. If you have not done that already, I would recommend having a schedule. I'm getting up at this time every single day, and just go through that. That's going to help you stay sane, stay a little bit normal, I guess, and it's just going to help you get up, get out of your pajamas, if you will, and wear normal clothes. I've been watching a few videos here and there, reading a few articles here and there about this pandemic thing, stay at home thing, and just have a normal, healthy routine. Make sure you guys are reading, keeping your mind sharp, not just playing video games or watching movies, Netflix, all that stuff. Just keep your mind sharp during this time. And now, as far as my class, I have actually posted a few things for this week already. If you go to Google Classroom, I have posted an article, actually a couple of articles on the Supreme Courts and how they're nominated. I think that's a fascinating read and very pertinent to what we're learning and going to be looking at here with the Judicial Branch, and then Marbury versus Madison. We're going to talk about some court cases. I'm going to lecture through some court cases, not today, and I think you all will enjoy it for the most part. The Judicial Branch is actually my favorite subject to teach. It's my favorite unit of the year. I absolutely love and adore court cases. I think they're fascinating. I think the history, and I think that just the whole story behind each court case is just it. They're so fascinating, and it tells you where our country was at that particular point in time with these certain court cases that we're going to look at. Now, other other assignments on Classroom, I am going to move forward with something called Ed Puzzle. And we had a little bit of difficulty with it yesterday. I want you guys to work on that tomorrow. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to set a schedule, a daily little schedule for you guys. Work on this today, work on this today. I'm going to lecture this day. And so Ed Puzzle, I will unblock all those videos before I post them, or I will try to. And what you do, you just watch the video, and there's a few questions here and there over the video. And it keeps track of your progress. I keep track of your progress through that. I think it will be enjoyable. And I will also post a few readings here and there for you guys to check out with the Judicial Branch. And really, we're almost done for the school year, for what we need to learn, what we need to cover in American government class. And yes, there is no EOC, there is no state mandated testing, but I'm still going to teach you guys what I think you ought to know in order to be an informed U.S. citizen. And we'll get to that shortly. Now, as far as live streaming, I'm going to try to stick, at least this next week, I'm going to try to lecture on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'm going to lecture both of my subjects that I teach back to back. So if you're really, really curious and want to recap on American history, you can knock yourself out with those streams too. I'll be doing that on this particular channel. And you guys can watch these. The videos will be saved on this channel, and I will post them on Google Classroom. They are already posted on Google Classroom. So just check that out. Now, I may or may not try to do a Zoom call. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. And we might just do a little classroom hangout and see how you guys are doing. If you have any questions about my assignments, or if you're having trouble with the Ed Puzzle, I might try that next week. MHS staff, we are going to do a Zoom call on Friday morning. So I'm going to see how that works with that, because I've never actually used it. And we have a little bit of training in it, but I'll see how it works there for you guys to see and check out. Okay, so it's 10:02. I'm going to go ahead and start lecturing. Okay, this would be like the start of a unit for us. And, so far we have covered the legislative branch. We've covered the executive branch. And now our third branch, the judicial branch. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind when we're talking about all three branches, checks and balances, checks and balances, checks and balances. And the way the Constitution was written, there's supposed to be, in theory, equal co-branches. Man, I haven't talked this much in a few days. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the judicial branch. Keep that in the back of your mind. What's the role of the president? What's the role of the legislative branch with the judicial branch? Now, when we're just talking very generalizations with the judicial branch, I always equate the judicial branch to a referee, if you will. So Congress, they write the laws, and they create the laws, and we've gone through that process. And then we have the executive branch, the president. They enforce the laws. They make sure the laws are carried out. They make sure that the laws are being followed. And then you have the judicial branch, who is kind of the judge and the jury of these constitutional acts of Congress, of the president. And they make sure that they are following the quote-unquote rules. And we will get to that. And they refer to the Constitution. And there's actually two interpretations two ways to interpret the Constitution. We will get to that later whenever we get closer to the court cases. So, today we are going to be looking at the structure of the judicial branch and the very, very general responsibility roles of the judicial branch. And I'm going off my Google slides here. You guys can refer to these in your notes in Google Classroom. So if you want to go and you want to take notes yourself, you can. I'm not going to slow down like I do in class and say, write this down, get this down, make sure you get this, understand this, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to do that. You guys can do that on your own leisure. And I recommend that you listen to this lecture and then go back and then do the notes yourself. Okay, so there are three parts to the judicial branch. Now we're talking the federal level and the state level here. So you're going to have your district courts, your court of appeals, and then the top, the supreme, like supreme pizza, if you will, the Supreme Court. And that's where everything stops. That's where it's final. That's where if the Supreme Court makes a decision, it's final. That's the last stop in the road. And we'll get to how many cases they actually see, the process of how they hear cases, the process of how and why they hear cases. But for our purposes, we will be talking about this process of the Court of Appeals, and mostly we'll be talking about district courts today. And there's two general purposes of the judicial branch: settling disputes, either between people or between states or between like corporations or even other countries or whatever, or judicial review. We're going to get into what judicial review is here in a moment. This is one of the most important powers and one of the most important checks that our government has. And it is very, very powerful, and it's like the end of the road when it comes to checks and balances. And I'll talk more about that here in a moment. And usually when a court case, when the Supreme Court makes a decision in a court case, it's final. It's over. It's done. That's what it is. So we'll talk more about that. You guys will fully understand judicial review and where judicial review started, because the Constitution, if you read Article 3 of the Constitution, which covers the judicial branch, it's like a paragraph. Okay, there's barely anything there. There's barely anything there about the Supreme Court and what the Supreme Court can do. And the framers of the Constitution, either A, they were running out of time, or B, they didn't want to give the courts too much power. But judicial review was not established in the original Constitution. And we'll get into how it was established and why it was established, and how this is very, very important today when we're talking about the Supreme Court and the judicial branch as a whole. So, just some vocab here for you. Judicial review. This is huge. If you don't understand judicial review, you're going to struggle with the judicial branch. And all it is checking to make sure government actions or laws are going to be constitutional or not. If it goes against the Constitution, that law, that action is thrown out. I'll give you an example. When President Trump was elected, right into his term, his first year, he passed an executive order. We've reviewed and talked about executive orders. Executive orders are as good as law. And President Trump had a travel ban on 5 countries in the Middle East. And the Supreme Court, they looked at this, executive order, and they actually reversed a few of those parts of the executive order. So, with that being said, they used the power of judicial review. To them, it went against the Constitution. They thought it was unconstitutional. And if it goes against the Constitution, they're going to kick it out. They're going to get rid of it. Okay? Constitutional, it's basically the opposite of unconstitutional. The Constitution will allow it. We'll talk about strict constitutional interpretations, and then we'll talk about constitutional restraint. That'll be the next time we lecture. That'll be the next time on Tuesday. I'll talk about that and what that means. And either people believe that the Constitution, word for word, you believe in the way was written, that's the way you interpret it, or there's a loose interpretation and this is maybe what the Constitution was saying, or this is what the Constitution can do. So there's always that argument in the courts, and how do you interpret the Constitution in 2020? Precedent. This is huge. We've actually talked about precedent with President George Washington. And precedent, this is, the courts are going to use a prior ruling. They're going to use prior court cases and decisions, and that's how they're going to move forward with other cases in the future. If there was a prior ruling, they're going to use it. Now, does that mean that they're going to rule that way every single time? No. They can actually look back and say this was totally wrong. Example, the Dred Scott case and also Plessy versus Ferguson. We'll review those later, but those two court cases, obviously, they're precedent. They're not followed today, and they have been reversed. We'll look at Brown versus Board of Education, that deemed that segregation was not fair and segregation was not legal, and those precedents were thrown out. All right, and we'll talk about that. We'll actually review the civil rights era of America as well. That'll be after the Judicial Branch, and we'll look more in depth with Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education, and then also not to get too ahead of ourselves, the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1965, very famously penned by one of my favorite presidents, Lyndon Baines Johnson. All right, some more vocab here. So district courts, this is where, at the federal level, this is where trials, this is where lawsuits are going to begin. Every court case at the federal level, they're going to start here. Now, let's say you get a moving violation or a parking ticket or something here in Mexico, Missouri. Does that mean you're going to a district court? No. We have our own circuit court, county, state court level, and that's where it's going to happen. That's where either you're going to go see a judge, you're going to go talk to a judge, or you'll pay a fine or whatever. Now, when we're talking about the federal level, these are federal level crimes, either issues between states or issues that happened, across the country, or federal laws were broken. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking primarily about the federal level here. Original jurisdiction. So you're going to see here, this is a map. These are the districts in the United States. There are 11 of them. Missouri, we're in district number 8. And if there's a federal issue in this particular area of the country, you're going to go to this district court number 8. And that's where you'll get things sorted out. You're not going to go straight to the Supreme Court unless the Supreme Court decides to hear it. Original jurisdiction. So the district court here in District 8, they are going to hear your court case here 1st, okay? And all court cases will begin here. Now, at this level, you're going to have witnesses testify, and you're going to have a jury. We've talked about the Bill of Rights, and one of your rights as a U.S. citizen is a trial by jury, and that is part of this as well. Now, when you get to the appellate level and the Supreme Court level, there are not going to be juries involved, and we'll talk about that process here in a moment. And that's one of your constitutional rights, is to be judged by your peers, so to speak, and all that. Now, unfortunately, we know with COVID-19, the courts are kind of suspended right now. The local courts, I believe, the Missouri Supreme Court is closed for the moment, and I believe the federal level is too. Don't quote me on that. Let me know if I'm right on that, but I'm pretty sure the state level is closed right now, but that's neither here nor there. Some more vocab words. When you guys are reading through court cases, these are just some very general vocab words for you guys to understand and to read. And here's the thing with the court cases. What I will do, the court cases that I will have you learn and read and understand, you will have a video, basically a review of that particular court case. Videos. There's a video series that I really, really enjoy on YouTube. And then I will lecture through them as well. I'll explain them as well. And then you guys will have little explanations, little readings that you'll have to do over those particular very, very important landmark court cases. So plaintiff, that's the person who is basically bringing the charge to the court. They have a problem, they have a lawsuit, they have an issue. It could be the government, it could be the state, it could be a corporation, it could be a person, whoever. And then the defendant, that's who is in trouble, so to speak, or could be in trouble. That's who's having the complaint against them. Some more vocab for you guys. And we're going to primarily be looking at criminal cases, so to speak. There'll be a couple of civil cases we'll look at. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at criminal cases. And this is when someone breaks the law. And we've talked about this as one of your constitutional rights. You are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, and that's part of this process. This could be, when we're talking about the Supreme Court, these are federal level crimes. These are big time federal level crimes. Now, if it's something in the state of Missouri, you'll go through the state level, and it's very, very similar how that all goes down. There's a district level, appellate level, and then a Missouri Supreme Court too. Civil cases. This is primarily if there's a dispute, a lawsuit between people. There's an issue. It's non-criminal. This could also, if you're looking at the state level, divorces, lawsuits between businesses, between people. This would be like your Judge Judy stuff, okay? And sadly, I've heard that she is going to be retiring pretty soon. And so this is an issue. Now, primarily, like I said, criminal cases, that's what we're going to be discussing mostly with the Judicial Branch. Now, let's say you go through the district level and you are found guilty. You've been charged of whatever reason, and you know that the trial was unfair, or there was some unfair process in the trial. That's when you will move up the chain. This is in the middle of the road. Now, it could, it's rare, it can go straight to the Supreme Court after the district level. And more than likely, though, it's going to go through the Court of Appeals first. And the Court of Appeals, they do not make any major decisions per se. They do not, the guilty, not guilty. What they do, they review the decisions that are made at the lower level courts. And they look to see if there was a fair trial, if things were presented in a fair way, if due process, that's a huge vocab word, and we've talked about that with the Bill of Rights. Due process, they make sure at this level, they make sure that due process is followed. They make sure that everyone is treated fairly. They make sure that procedures are followed correctly, and they review this. Now, they can reverse decisions if they deem it unfair, if they find it to be unfair at the district level or even the lower courts. They can deem it unfair. And now, appellate jurisdiction, they can only hear cases that are appealed to them. There will be no court cases that start at the appellant level or the Court of Appeals level. Now, ultimately, the Supreme Court is an appellate court, but this is the court that's in between that kind of cleans up the messes, that cleans up the stickier, dirtier court cases at the district level, and they try their best so that those court cases don't make it to the Supreme Court. Okay, they're kind of the cleanup man, if you will. All right, so this slide is more vocab. All right, so these are very, very important vocab words. I've already talked about due process. The Supreme Court, they have to do things very, very fairly and follow procedures. One of your rights as a U.S. citizen is the right to a speedy trial. And there actually have been court cases that have been dismissed because they did not follow due process, because they did not have a quote-unquote speedy trial. Now, there is not like a time limit per se for a speedy trial, but you're not going to sit in jail or sit in limbo for years upon years. And if that's the case, then due process has been broken. And that's when a possibility of whatever you're being charged for could be thrown out. And that has happened in our court systems. Writ of habeas corpus. So you have to be told, this is another constitutional right, you have to be told why you're being charged. You have to be told why you're being arrested, why you're being put in jail. And we'll talk about Miranda, your Miranda rights. That's a very famous court case. And I like court cases because they do talk about a lot of seedy, shady individuals and how your rights are protected. That's kind of why I like court cases, that the stories themselves are very interesting. Now, ex post facto, we talked about this concept with the legislative branch. Basically, you cannot get in trouble with the law. Let's say that they pass a law today and it was legal yesterday. All right. So here's a good example. There's been a federal law that in order to purchase tobacco products or any, vape, e-cigarettes, all that stuff, vaping, all that stuff, you could at one point in time, if you're 18 years old, you could purchase those items, those products, Well, you have to be 21 years of age in order to purchase those products now. Now, before, let's say that you as an 18-year-old, you bought tobacco products. The government or the courts or the police or whoever, they cannot go back and say, well, you did this yesterday when this was legal, so now you're in trouble. They can't do that. Now, if you do it forward, if you break the law forward, obviously that's when you're going to get in trouble. So we have talked about that concept before. All right, so the Supreme Court. This is the final stop in the process of the judicial branch. And this, like I said, this also is the process at the state level. And this is the highest court in the land. We'll talk about the makeup of the Supreme Court and why they have 9 members. And again, their main job, they want to make sure that the laws are constitutional. Judicial review. Please understand that when we're talking about the Supreme Court. And they're going to hear court cases that were lower than them. Okay? They're going to hear court cases from the appellate level, the courts of appeal level, and the district level. Now, they can pull court cases up from the district level for them to hear. It's rare, it's hard, it's difficult, but primarily they're going to be looking at those court cases at the Court of Appeals level. Okay? They can choose what cases they hear. And they're very limited in the amount of court cases they can have in a calendar year. And they pick the most important, the biggest issues, the biggest problems in our nation, so to speak, hot topic issues. They're going to look at those. Give you guys a very good example. The Civil Rights Movement. 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. They chose to hear that case because segregation was a very hot and controversial topic. And they wanted to look at the legality of that, and they wanted to challenge that and look at that, and that's kind of part of the court's responsibility too. And this writ of certiorari, it's Latin. I don't know how to say it very well. I just call it writ of cert, okay? I'm just going to tell you guys I am not very good with Latin. And this is the actual order by the Supreme Court of saying we're going to hear this particular court case. We're going to hear this case. We're going to review it. We're going to take it and we're going to go through this process of determining whether or not due process was followed, and if whatever happened at the lower courts, if it was constitutional or not. Now, some more vocab. When we're talking about the Supreme Court, when you guys are reading through your Supreme Court cases, you're going to see these two terms, and you're going to become very familiar with them. The majority opinion and the dissenting opinion. There's also concurring opinion too. I'll get to that here in a moment. But the majority opinion, the courts have to give an explanation why they decided the way that they did. And they're very detailed. They give reasons. It's almost like a research paper. It's almost like a thesis statement, if you will. And they explain in detail why they believed the way that they did and why they ruled the way that they did. Now, something that is just as important as the majority opinion is the dissenting opinion. The dissenting opinion, those are the members of the court who disagree or did not rule with the majority. and they can give their reasons why they did not agree with the majority. I will give you guys a very good example of a very famous dissenting opinion, and this dissenting opinion mattered much down the road. And I keep referring to Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education. But Plessy versus Ferguson, one of the dissenting opinions, said that this whole separate but equal doctrine, this whole segregation thing, was totally illegal because it went against the 14th Amendment. It's totally not equal. Separate but equal is legal. It was totally not equal. So, later down the road, when Brown versus Board of Education was happening, they actually looked at some of these dissenting opinions, previous decisions of the court, and that was actually used in Brown versus Board of Education, one of the dissenting opinions. Now, another term, concurring opinion, this goes with majority opinion as well, and basically they agree with the court, the majority, but it's for a different reason than the majority, but they voted yes or in favor with the majority. We're almost done here. So, when the Supreme Court makes a decision, all of their decisions are binding to the lower courts. Okay, so what I'm saying is, whatever they say cannot be reversed. Okay, it's the last stop in the road. It's the final stop in the road. And usually it's the final stop in our government. Okay, not saying that things cannot be changed or reversed, because they have. And things change over time. Obviously, slavery, civil rights movement, even gay marriage, gay rights, all that stuff has changed over time. And what the Supreme Court has said in the past is not always binding, or not. It will not always stay with us. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, when the Supreme Court refuses to hear a case, all of the decisions in the lower courts are going to stand. So if they made a decision at the appellate level, or if they made a decision at the district level, or even at the state level, all that stuff is going to stand, and it'll stay. Those decisions will stay. Now, here is our current makeup of our Supreme Court right now. And during the Trump administration, he's had the opportunity to select 2 Supreme Court justices that have been, they've gone through the whole process of being selected, and the president nominates, and then the Senate approves or disapproves. Okay, so Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, they were approved. And right now, if you're looking at the makeup of the court, there are 5 conservative judges, and then there are 4 liberal judges. And these judges will tend to vote in the same manner, likewise with the liberal bloc. And they'll try to stick together. Now, the conservatives, they kind of have the advantage right now in the courts. And usually you're going to see a lot of court decisions 5-4. And 5 will win or make the decision in a court case. And there are 9 judges. 9 judges on the Supreme Court. And they're called justices. There's 1 Chief Justice, and that person, they are basically like the mouthpiece, the one who kind of runs the court cases. They preside over the court. They don't have any more power than the other 8 judges. Okay, I want to make that clear. but they're just the one that makes the process uh, basically, I don't know, go smooth, I guess. And they just make sure that the court uh, flows and does what it's supposed to do. So they don't have any other power um, over the other justices. Now, I actually have, this is a side note, I actually had the opportunity to talk to one of our uh, Missouri Supreme Court judges, and interestingly enough, she told me that they actually take turns at the state level being the Chief Justice, or being the person in charge of the Supreme Court. And it usually is something that they don't want, at the state level at least, but they take turns with it and they just do it and move on. At the Supreme Court level, the U.S. Supreme Court level, I cannot speak for that. But it is a big honor to be a Chief Justice. All right, we're almost done here. Now, this is the appointment process that I talked about earlier. And you all read about this in Classroom. I posted an article, a News ELA article for you guys to enjoy and to read. So the president, they appoint the Supreme Court justice, and then the Senate approves. Okay, it's a very complicated, this is a one sentence thing in our PowerPoint presentation, but it's very complicated. It is long. There's hearings, there's questionings, there's very in-depth looks at the Supreme Court nominees, and we're going to talk why here in a second. It's a very complicated, hard process, as it should be. And the Senate should do their due diligence. The Senate should do their diligence to select the right person for the job. Now, interestingly enough, the qualifications in the Constitution, in Article 3, there are no qualifications to be a U.S. Supreme Court Justice. It's very odd, but there is a precedent. There is a pattern. You obviously want an attorney. You obviously want someone with legal experience and someone who is very knowledgeable of the law, and usually someone who has been a judge before, or who's been very invested in the judicial system. It's very strange to me. You have qualifications for senators, House of Representative members, the president, the vice president. You have all these qualifications, and then in Article 3, nothing. It's kind of unique, but again, you want someone who has experience. You want someone who is knowledgeable. There's no age requirement like there is for the president or for House of Representative members or senators, which is quite odd. Now we haven't had very young Supreme Court justices, but we'll get to that here in a second. Now, when there's a vacancy, that's when the president can make an appointment. That's when the president can say, I want this person to be my appointee into the Supreme Court. Now, a Supreme Court justice, there's 3 ways a Supreme Court justice can be removed from office. Either they can resign voluntarily, like they're going to retire. They can be impeached, which is very, very rare. Impeached, they can go through the impeachment process and be removed from office through that impeachment process with Congress involved there, just like we talked about with the president. Or they can die. Okay, Anthony Scalia is a very good example of that. Anthony Scalia passed away while he was on the bench, so to speak. And President Obama wanted to make the appointment, but the Senate, they wanted to wait till President Trump became president to make that decision. It was very controversial. I don't want to get into that. But yeah, so Supreme Court justices, they are appointed for life. They are appointed for life, and there's a very good reason. They're appointed for life so they don't have to go through the election process. So they don't have to go through the whims of society, so to speak. They don't want to have to please the people, so to speak. They want to go off what the Constitution says. They want to go off what the Constitution is interpreting, what the Constitution has said, or also just previous decisions too. So being appointed for life, there's actually been a lot of talk and say that this is too long and this gives the Supreme Court too much power. Very famously, FDR, I'll give you a historical example. FDR was dealing with a very old court at the time of his presidency with the New Deal and with World War II coming up and all that. And he actually wanted to pass a lot of New Deal legislation. And the Supreme Court was actually ruling them unconstitutional. The Supreme Court was like, hold on a second here, Mr. President. You are using too much power. This is getting too big. This is not constitutional. This is going against the Constitution. And then FDR was getting very, 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 very upset with this whole process. And he wanted to pack the courts, so to speak, and add younger judges. And also he wanted to limit the age limit. Instead of making it for life, he wanted that there to be a retirement age for judges. And it's again, I always talk about this with you guys. It's up to you how you think about this. That's your decision. I have my own opinions. I have my own thoughts about this. It's how you think about it and whether or not you think appointed for life is good or not. And that's a matter of opinion. That's you. Okay, that's up to you to just make that decision. Just explaining both sides of the argument for you guys to think about. All right, so that is it for today. We will go through. I've actually kind of talked about Marbury and Plessy today, but we are going to go through on Tuesday, the same time. I'm going to live stream at 10 o'clock. We're going to be talking about court cases. So we've talked about the structure and the responsibility and the duties of the judicial branch, but we will talk about the actual court cases, the history, so to speak, of the Supreme Court, and just these landmark court decisions that are very, very important when we're talking about the history of our country and the history of the Supreme Court. And ultimately, I talked about this at the beginning, checks and balances. When we're talking about Supreme Court, it's all about checks and balances. All right, guys. Well, if you have any questions, please let me know. You guys can email me. You can always comment on Google Classroom too. You can leave comments there. There have been a few students who have reached out to me on Google Classroom, and you can leave comments there on particular assignments. If the videos are not working, just please email me. I'm going to try my best to alleviate that issue a little bit. And guys, be safe. Be safe as always. And guys, stay clean. Don't be stupid. And guys, this is a very trying time for us all. Stay positive. That's the last thing I'm going to say to you guys. Stay positive through this. Keep your head up high, and it'll be over. It will be over someday. And just hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. You guys have heard me say that all last week. Be safe, guys, and thank you for watching. Wow. This is not a Retro Tony video. All right, guys. Thanks.